Staggeringly poor build quality. Can you see that? It's bent. They've literally sent me a bent laptop. I've heard this hinge made it make a few nasty cracks. I'm sending this back and I'm not going to ask for a replacement. Wait, doesn't require. What's with MSI laptops clicking when I move them? It's not clipped together properly on the back.
I don't want to defend this. I think this might be the stupidest thing I've ever seen in a laptop.
That's it. Had enough of this thing. Goodbye. Oh, that's crunchy. I think they've dropped this one at the factory. See that? It's got a dent. They've dropped this one at the factory and dinged that corner, and then once again, it's past quality control.
This is MSI's cheapest gaming laptop, and more often than not, it's also the cheapest gaming laptop on the market. Debuting all the way back in 2018 as one of the first low-cost laptops with thin-ish display bezels, the GF63 is an ancient design by laptop standards, and MSI have kept this thing chugging along by simply swapping the chips out every year. The pitch for this one, and part of the name, is that it's a thin laptop, but at 2.5cm thick it's a bit difficult to see what they're on about. It is remarkably lightweight though. Coming in at only 1.8 kilos, the GF63 almost feels like it's got something missing on the inside. Hold that thought. Included in the box is not too much, just the laptop, a 180 watt power brick, some of the usual paraphernalia asking for too much information, and a caddy for installing a 2.5-inch SSD or hard disk. Yep, it's 2018 alright. Almost unbelievably, this laptop arrived completely free of obvious factory defects or cosmetic blemishes. There's some genuine comedy in the fact that the cheapest MSI product is the first one we've seen on the channel that they've managed to slap together properly. Congratulations, I guess. Design-wise, this is a fairly generic bland black laptop with a thin brushed aluminium skin on both the display lid and the keyboard palm rest. And despite all sorts of chaotic triangles and fake vents being dotted around the underside, it's still pleasantly boring to look at from most angles. Aside from the bright red dragon on the lid and the red lit keyboard, it does a pretty good job of just looking like an laptop. So cheap, lightweight, and inoffensive. There's probably a catch somewhere, so let's have a closer look. Around the outside, going counterclockwise, there's separate headphone and microphone jacks, 2 USB 3 Type-A ports, 1 USB Type-C with DisplayPort, Gigabit Ethernet and a Kensington lock. At the rear is a lonely HDMI port, and on the left is the DC-in jack, another USB 3 Type-A, and a battery status light. Note that the USB-C port does not support charging the device, and the HDMI is version 1.4, which only supports a refresh rate of 30Hz at 4K. Right, let's see what we've got in here. I was expecting bad things from the trackpad, but against all odds it's actually pretty serviceable. The button is well weighted and has a satisfying click which you can activate fairly easily from anywhere on the lower 2/3 of the tracking surface. Accuracy is pretty good, palm ejection's pretty good, and it doesn't really fight with you too much when you need to one-hand a gaming session because chips. The plastic surface feels okay for now, but it will degrade with use. Glass trackpads are far more durable, but they're also more expensive, so you wouldn't really expect to see one here. Even more so than the trackpad, the red backlit keyboard is surprisingly decent and noticeably nicer to use than the one fitted to the more expensive MSI Sword 15. The layout certainly makes more sense than the Swords, with the FN key close to both brightness and volume controls, and there's a row of useful keys down the right hand side instead of a hopelessly squished number pad. Key switches have a short throw, which I found a little bit jarring at first, but after adapting to hitting them a little less firmly than usual, I've decided I quite like these. They've got a good tactile response and they're pleasantly stable and precise feeling. It's even nice and quiet. Keyboard flex is close to non-existent while typing, although you can induce some in the center if you're really keen. Why do people do this? There's actually a surprising 3 layers of material inside contributing to the relative solidity of the keyboard deck. Under the aluminium skin is a thick layer of plastic, and below the keyboard this is further reinforced with another metal sheet. Disappointingly, the keyboard is plastic welded in and can't be replaced. While the typing experience is generally decent, the leading edge of the palm rest is where a few different materials and textures smash together, and the result is a fairly jagged ridge that will occasionally bite you. Right, some of you might have known this was coming. We can't talk about the display assembly without addressing the hinge. I have decades of experience repairing laptops, and at this point I could confidently generalize and call a certain brand's hinge designs so bad that they're malicious. But I'll pull that punch and let this one speak for itself. It's certainly not trying to hide anything. From new, there's a very distinctive crunching sound every time you move the display. Now taking a look from inside, behind the display's lower bezel, things are grim. Anchor points for the lid are far too short and narrow, and the minuscule screws go straight into tiny plastic standoffs that are grouped far too close together. This design concentrates a high force in a very small area and relies on thin, brittle plastic to bear the load. Without any reinforcement, these little plastic standoffs bend back and forth slightly every time you open and close the screen, causing them to fatigue and eventually fail, which usually manifests in the hinge being suddenly torn out of the display bezel and your day being ruined. Replacement lid assemblies are readily available for the GF63, but they're not cheap, and because MSI use aggressively sticky double-sided tape to attach the LCD to the lid, you've got a very high chance of cracking the LCD screen while removing it. This right here is a completely valid reason to avoid this laptop entirely. You are buying a product that is almost guaranteed to fail and that will be expensive and wasteful to repair. That is textbook planned obsolescence. Given the low price and the resultant enormous sales figures on the GF63, we're going to press on, but you've been warned and I would strongly urge you to consider buying something more durable. Now you probably weren't expecting too much from the screen, so you probably won't be too disappointed. Brightness is low at 250 nits, color gamut coverage is well below the minimum acceptable sRGB standard, and as is the case far too often in this class of machine, everything looks dull and miserable. Above the display is the usual array of poor quality webcam and poor quality stereo microphones. The dim grainy image and very poor sound quality are perfect for reenacting a 2008 unboxing of Grand Theft Auto 4.
On this side, there's a picture of a woman, and she's enjoying a lollipop.
The directly down-firing speakers installed in the GF63 are the familiar ugly little rectangular units fitted to pretty much every low-end laptop at this point. Speaker enclosures are unusually large and they are shock-mounted to avoid vibration. MSI bundles the Nahemix software suite, providing user-adjustable audio processing to get the most out of the internal sound system. When set up the way I prefer, with everything other than bass and treble enhancement turned off, audio is best described as adequate. It goes loud enough to drown out the fans and it won't blow out your eardrums, but there's little to no bass or higher frequencies and it just sounds a bit meh. On the plus side, the integrated headphone amplifier seems pretty decent, doing a completely acceptable job of powering my big Focals, so that's something. Included SSD is a 1/2 TB Samsung PM9B1. Read and write speeds are fairly typical for this class of laptop at around half the maximum speed of the best PCIe 4 SSDs and nowhere near newer PCIe 5 drives. Once again, MSI have not put a heat spreader over the controller or the NAND flash, instead shoving two pointless thermal pads on the wrong side of the drive. Perfect. MSI Center is where you'll find most controls for the laptop, including power modes, fan curve customization, and general system settings. The software is frustratingly laid out, hiding commonly used buttons behind annoying animations, and after every update it requires you to agree to the privacy policy again. In case you're wondering, at this point in time there's nothing too concerning in that privacy policy, but it is unnerving how often you might need to check it for dodgy changes. On the plus side, power modes can be selected from within the BIOS, so you don't need to have MSI Center installed unless you want to use a specific feature of that app. And speaking of that BIOS, I should point out that when I received this machine, NVIDIA Dynamic Boost was not functional, and resetting the BIOS to factory settings mysteriously fixed it. I already addressed this in a separate video, and while I'm unsure if this is all new GF63s, it is important to note that all testing has been carried out with Dynamic Boost fully enabled. Power draw on the GF63 is extremely conservative by gaming laptop standards. At idle in balanced mode, as measured from the power outlet, the machine uses around 22 watts, and when running flat out with the CPU and GPU fully loaded up, this peaks at only about 112 watts. This one definitely won't cost too much to run, even if you live somewhere with high electricity prices. The 52 watt-hour battery fitted to this unit is reporting 51.5 watt-hours after calibrating over a few charge cycles, which is acceptably close to rated capacity. This will gradually drop with use. Now, battery run times are exactly as bad as you'd expect from a small battery with powerful-ish components. With the display set to its maximum brightness, which is only 250 nits, and sitting idle on the Windows desktop, the GF63 managed a very brief 5 hours and 32 minutes before shutting down. During my usual mix of heavy internet use, it quit after exactly 3 hours. Not good. Charging it back up from empty, it takes exactly 1 hour to hit 50% and 3 hours to get back up to 100%. That's almost impressively slow. Now, when it finally wears out, that battery is difficult and potentially dangerous to replace, since MSI have decided to mount it with double-sided tape instead of screws, so if you're removing it, you will have to use extreme caution. There are also multiple ribbon cables loosely hanging underneath the battery, so care needs to be taken not to damage any of these. Removal can take anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour depending on how much it fights you, and the part number is BTY-M6K. Remember that if you're crazy enough to buy one of these. The processor included here is an Intel Core i5-12450H which is a fairly interesting chip with 4 Alder Lake performance cores with hyperthreading and 4 Gracemont efficiency cores for a total of 12 threads. Intel specifies a TDP of 45 watts for this chip, and the maximum clock speed is 4.4 GHz on the performance cores and 3.3 on the E cores. The CPU is fed by what looks to be a 5+2+1 phase power supply with 5 phases dedicated to the CPU cores. RAM supplied with this unit is a pair of 8GB Samsung DDR4 3200 single-rank chips with CAS latency of 22. It's good to see laptops in this class finally shipping with dual-channel memory more often. And of course, the GPU is a GeForce RTX 4050, so there's 2560 CUDA cores, 48 ROPs, and 80 TMUs. Memory is an acceptable 6GB, but unfortunately it's being choked by a very narrow 96-bit memory bus. Maximum TGP is an almost wildly low 45 watts, and since this laptop supports NVIDIA Dynamic Boost, that power will vary during gameplay. Power delivery for the GPU is provided by an extremely minimalistic 2+1 phase power supply. The system tasked with extracting the heat from these parts is what could be described as half of a cooler. It's a very basic design with 3 heat pipes and one 50mm fan pushing cool air over 2 heat exchangers. Without the fan, the cooling system weighs in at a minuscule 121 grams. Less weight means less thermal mass, and that means the fan has to kick in faster and harder to deal with spikes in heat output, and in this case you'll pretty much hear it ramping up constantly even with the machine mostly idle. Fan noise is generally quiet, but the constant fluctuations are definitely annoying. Factory thermal paste application is pretty much perfect and covers the entirety of both dies. Cold plate surfaces aren't too bad, with only very light scuffing which will have no impact on temperatures. Now, the GPU's voltage regulators aren't contacted by the cooler at all, so they're relying on minimal airflow to keep temperatures under control. Having a look at this with a thermal camera while the computer's under load, the MOSFETs seem to max out at about 80 degrees, which is completely okay, but they're still easily the hottest components on the entire board, and I'm not sure I'd trust this setup to stay within spec on a hot day. Another knock against the cooler is that you can't take the fan out to clear dust and cat hair out of the heatsink fins without removing the entire assembly. On the plus side, disassembly only takes around 10 to 15 minutes, so it's about a half-hour job all up. Now, because a gaming laptop is expected to run at full load for extended periods of time, we're going to have a look at how the temperatures and power delivery behave over a 30-minute torture test. For this test, the laptop is in its extreme performance mode, sitting flat on the desk with Cinebench R23 and MSI Combustor running together for 30 minutes. Data is recorded approximately every half second, and clock speeds won't be included since they'll vary wildly depending on the workload. Power for the Core i5 is kept within a range of 20 to 30 watts, albeit quite erratically, with the expected brief drops every time Cinebench restarts. You can safely ignore those outliers down the bottom. Temperature briefly spikes but settles in the mid-70s and stays there. Now, this is the average temperature across all cores, but if we throw in the hottest core, you can see that it's still hanging out in the 70s, so there are no problems here. The RTX 4050 GPU is similarly consistent, hanging out around the targeted 45 watts for the duration of the test, with the GPU temperature hanging out right at 70 degrees and the GPU hotspot just barely nudging 80. Lastly, video memory just about matches the GPU core temperature, sitting just under 70 degrees. If you're wondering whether a laptop stand or cooler would drop temperatures any further, here's a side-by-side of the GF sitting directly on the desk and elevated on a fanless stand. Can you tell which is which? The GF63 is the first laptop I've seen with ventilation so adequate and cooling requirements so low that you may as well just park it straight on the desk. Despite this, you still can't get away with gaming on your lap as the temperatures underneath are far too high. Speaking of surface temperatures, they're generally kept well under control in areas you're likely to actually touch, such as the keyboard and palm rests, and that's especially impressive given that there's a conductive metal skin in this area. There is one major hotspot in the top left where the cooling system's located, and temperatures will hit the 50s here, which is not exactly dangerous, but it will make you jump if you aim for the escape key and miss. So, low wattage, a small processor, and a tiny GPU. Against all odds, the GF turns out to be a passable setup for running AAA games at frame rates above 60, provided you're happy to be conservative with the settings. You'll find the occasional game that you can crank up to Ultra, but for all the heavy titles I tested, the sweet spot for decent graphics and a high frame rate really seems to be medium. It's pretty impressive to see a 45-watt GPU handling heavy games this well, and it shows how much of an improvement in performance per watt Nvidia's new Ada architecture has over their previous Ampere and Turing generations. With that said, a knock against this configuration for gaming is that Core i5. It's usually being run at far less than 30 watts, and while it's managing to keep up for the most part, in many games it's being pushed to the absolute limit, and it can cause noticeable stutters here and there. Nothing game-breaking, but it's not enough to guarantee a buttery smooth experience. So, gathering benchmark data from numerous games to position the GF63 on my relative gaming performance chart, things are looking okay, but not great. The GF isn't really on par with the last generation laptop with an RTX 3060, but at least it's still an improvement over anything with a 3050 or 3050 Ti. Realistically, looking into the future, it feels like this will be the absolute minimum to get games running sooner rather than later. So gameplay performance definitely isn't even close to a selling point here. And with that said, I think it goes without saying that I do not recommend this laptop. In fact, to be clear, I strongly recommend that you do not buy this. Its performance is, by design, crippled with low power delivery, battery life is terrible, the display is terrible, the design and construction are appalling from a perspective of durability, and it's generally unnecessarily difficult to carry out basic repairs and maintenance. The only genuine positives here are a decent enough keyboard and trackpad, low weight and low power consumption. That's it. And on that basis, I'm giving this one a rating of 2 sad laptops. On that completely arbitrary note, thanks very much for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you hate planned obsolescence, and I'll see you in the next video.